Thank you so much for inviting me to have the keynote today. This is my first LLVM conference, so I'm very honored to be able to be picked out to do the keynote. So I want to thank Tanya and the rest of the foundation for putting on this event. I know they are a lot of work, so thank you to you. We're going to talk today about the LLVM release process. But first, who am I? What am I doing here? That's a question I ask myself every morning. I work at a small company called Ubisoft. You might have heard of them if you play any games. I work as a compiler engineer on the Anvil team. And Anvil is the game engine that powers games like Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, Rainbow Six, and many, many more. We have a pretty big number of developers using LLVM-related tools every day, and I'm responsible for most of them. So this presentation is going to go through, oh, I forgot a small important point. I'm also one of the release managers for LLVM, so that's why I'm holding a talk on the release process. So this presentation is eat your vegetables before your main course kind of presentation. We're supposed to learn the practical things that you need to know to help us that are the release managers. And then you're going to learn all the cool stuff that is happening in LLVM. So hopefully after this presentation, you will know a little more about why we make releases, how we as release maintainers are trying to get them out, and also how you can help us better. And in the end, if we have time, we have a small discussion on how to improve this in the future. And I'm super happy if you come up to me afterwards, or maybe we do a roundtable on how to improve this release process later. So one question, I've only been a release maintainer since LLVM 15. So I haven't done this for very long. I think Hans, sitting in front here, did over 10 releases or something like that. So he's much more, I took over after him. But the reason we do these releases, and a question that I've gotten is like, why do we spend so much time on getting these releases done? It takes a lot of effort. And a lot of companies here are probably already working out of more or less the latest version of LLVM. And always when we nag people, one of the responses I get is, well, it's already fixed in head, so people can go grab that if they want to have this bug fix. And our company is already integrating this on a daily or weekly basis. So let's move to always live by head or something like that. And I think this is a good philosophy for a lot of software. It doesn't really work for a project like LLVM. And I'm going to tell you why I think that's the case, at least. LLVM development is happening at a furious pace. We're talking about 100 to 150 commits per day, in average, even on weekends. This is not only happening on weekdays kind of a project. In each release, there is around 17,000 commits. And we actively encourage API breaks. We're not saying, no, you're not allowed to do it. We're saying, if you need to break the API, go ahead. For a small team that needs to integrate it, so consider, for example, Ubisoft. We have a lot of developers, we have big engines, we have a lot of code that needs to be compiled. I am one guy integrating that into our workflow. It's not realistic for me to take every single commit or a weekly commit or something like that. We need to have some kind of stable points. And I think this goes to show for other things like distributions. I think every distribution, every Linux distribution or other distribution would hate an idea that we didn't have releases in LLVM. Vendors like my company and many others, and also third-party development. I don't know if you've seen this, but a lot of people that are developing their tools on top of LLVM is usually complaining about the API broke. If that couldn't be tied to a specific release, it would be very difficult, I think, for third parties to build on top of LLVM. Another good thing we have noticed as release manager is that this can create focus points. So a sub-team of LLVM wants to get a feature in or a bug fix in, they can focus on our releases. And this creates a little bit of a push, a little bit of a drive to get a feature or a function in during a time window. Back to deprecations. This can also be helped by releases. We can say that for this next release, for LLVM 16, this is going to be a warning. In 17, this is gone. This gives you a heads up to the users using the API or using the tool. It makes it easier to communicate, to say, this change is going to happen in LLVM 17, instead of saying, this release is going to happen 250 commits from now. So it provides an easier breaking point for changing your API or changing your tool. So I think making releases, even though they are time-consuming, they take a lot of effort, it's worth it for the LLVM community in order to keep growing and keep being integrated into use by more vendors and more people. But to do this, to do releases, we need to have someone that helps that process. So we need release managers. The role of a release manager is to shepherd the release. Basically, we don't write any code during the release window. We just triage issues, communicate with everyone here. This is the plan, this is what we're doing. We're delaying this release, we're pushing this forward, blah, 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 right? That's what we're doing. And also, we put a lot of time in between releases to improve the release workflow. And especially Tom has done a really good job with improving the release flow. And also, there is a lot of nagging. And we'll get to that later, but sometimes you feel like you're talking to your child that doesn't want to eat their vegetables. So what I'm saying is, eat your vegetables. We have 2 release managers. Most of you probably know Tom, or seen him around in the community. He's also part of the board, I think. Yeah, okay. I got a from Tanya, so. He's been doing releases since, I don't know when, but a very long time. And then it's me. And what we have decided to do is to split the releases. So for the even releases, Tom is the release manager. And for odd releases, it's me. The reason we did this is that we find it easier for one person to be the principal manager. That doesn't mean that I just sit back and let Tom do everything for 16. I'm usually helping out, and if he needs to be gone, we do releases on a very specific time schedule. We're going to get to that, but if one of us wants to take a vacation or something, we can step in and help each other. But in general, if it's an odd release, it's me. If it's an even release, it's Tom. We are on a time schedule release. We don't consider features or functionality, really, when we do our releases. We do them 2 releases per year, 6 months apart. We think this is a good time schedule to be on for a big project like LLVM. Making it more often would require a lot more effort, I think. So we think this is good enough for now. I should also say that everything on this slide is kind of like made up by me and Tom. So that means that your people's input into this process is super important. So if anyone have really strong feelings about, I think you're doing releases too often, too late, whatever, that's a good discussion to have. It's not like we're coming down from the holy mountain with the scriptures of LLVM release project. This is very much a living process, and we try to refine it and make it better for every release. Anyway, the schedule we have right now is the Tuesday. Tuesdays are a very important day for release managers in LLVM. All the releases happening on a Tuesday. So we start on the 4th Tuesday of January, and I have a typo. And we start for odd releases on the 4th Tuesday of July. So that's coming up soon. Here is a rough time schedule. We create the branch, the release branch, 3 days before the first RC1. Usually RC1 is a terrible release, and no one should use it in any kind of production capacity because it's basically just a snapshot of current head. At one point, when I did an internal presentation on the release process for LLVM, I had a very good, what do you call it, metaphor for this. Making a LLVM release is like trying to bake a photocopy of a train speeding down the rails, right? Development happening at this furious pace in the main. You have to kind of, we just grab this point. So that's what we're doing. RC1 goes out, and usually that comes back with a bunch of bug fixes, right? Or a bunch of issues. These are not done, this functionality is not done, and so on. Then we continue on 2 weeks, iterations, until we get to final. Commonly, RC3 is not the final release. There's usually an RC4. But it all depends on what we feel, and this is a lot of what we feel is a very important thing for the LLVM release managers as well. A lot of it goes on, like, we feel this is stable enough for a release. We also have metrics, of course, but there's a lot of feeling goes into this. Okay, we released final. So we released 16.0.0 a couple of weeks ago. What happens after that? Well, people still find bugs in our software. It turns out that just because you call something final, it's not bug-free. So after that, we continue on the 2-week cadence and release point releases. So every 2 weeks after the release of the final, we do a point release. And for this, there are no RCs, there is no extended testing period or anything like that. But once again, if a release manager feels a different way, we delay or we skip. All right, this is a very nice plan. You see 2 weeks increments, looks great. Let's look at the reality of a release. Because as you all know, no good plan survives contact with the enemy, and the enemy in this case is bugs. So let's look at a real release and take 15 as an example. We branched off release 15.x branch, the 26th. That was on the spot. So good job. Then it took 4 days, not 3 days. And then it took 10 days instead of 14 days, and so on. You see, it shifted a little bit. The plan we have is not what's happening in reality. And this is where the part of release managers communicating with the community comes in, right? This is where we're posting in the forums saying, hey, we are delaying this. Can someone have a look at the bug list? We seem to have a lot of issues in this one, or whatever. So I think this is okay. And then actually for 15, I was actually surprised when I looked at itself. Then it went like a clockwork. The only problem was that I couldn't even fit. We had a 15.07, but it didn't fit on my slide, so I thought, well, it doesn't really matter. The important part here is that we are targeting doing .4, .5, and then stopping that release. But it turns out that if you have enough really bad bugs, you kind of have to go on. And this is an important part, because here, when we end development of the 15.3, that's it. We're off to 16. And I think 16 right now is at 16.03. So we have maybe 2 more point releases, and then End of July, we are branching 17. There are some circumstances when we will go back and do an extra release. Security is the main reason to do an extra release, or an ABI break or something like that. But it will take something really big, because it takes a lot out of us and our release testers and so on to do a release. So we want to say this is the cutoff point, and that's it. So how do we do testing? Because testing is kind of the most important part of the release process. We've been able to set up around 10 different bots that do different testing. And this is what you're expecting. We're building everything. We're running all the unit tests. We're running all the lit integration tests, all that, for 10 platforms. So everyone that has been working in the LLVM community knows that that's not enough to get a comprehensive testing. And that's true, because there are more platforms than those 10 we're targeting. There are a billion different configurations for LLVM. You can use it in so many different ways, on so many different code bases and all that. To augment that, we have what we call release testers. And these are contributors from the community that are donating their time to do some extra testing on a release. So every time we do a release, starting from RC1, we put out a post in the discourse forum, in the release testers subforum, saying that, hey, we tagged a release. And then the release testers goes off and does whatever testing they want on their platform. And that can be anyone in here. You're working with a company or by yourself on a specific configuration. You can be a release tester. The idea here is to feed back as much information from every release, and especially early in the RC phases. As much information as possible. This is broken. It helps us a tremendous lot getting that information before we do the release instead of after. All right. I'm giving you all a heads up. The next slide is going to be a lot, so I'm going to take a sip of water before we look at that. We're going to talk about how to land a fix in the release branch. And it's going to be messy. Whoa. OK. I have small badges up here. I don't know if they are visible or for all you guys all in the back, but the badges are basically saying user, RM for release manager, dev for developer, GH for our GitHub actions. Owner is the code owner of the piece of code we're changing. All right, so you find an issue. You're downloading RC1, you compile it, it doesn't work. You file an issue. Great. You importantly add it to the milestone for the next release that you want this to be fixed in. A release manager will then look at it and say, yeah, this looks like a legit issue. I don't know this part of the code, but it looks like a legit issue. Because it's very important to remember, the release manager does not know all the code in LLVM. My brain would be this big if I knew all the code in LLVM. But I can see if it's a good issue or not, or a valid issue or not. Usually at this point, a developer for that code is stepping in, creating a fix, and go through the normal fabricator review process to land this in main. And that's very important. We don't take bug fixes directly into the release branch. We want them to be landed in main. There are some exceptions, and there is always exceptions. One of those exceptions are, this is something that no longer exists in main. So maybe we need to do a targeted fix for the release branch. But in that case, we still want you to upload that and review it in Fabricator, the normal review process. When that has landed into main or into somewhere else because we couldn't take it into main. The dev, or the user, or the release manager is going to comment in the issue / cherry pick and the SHA of the commit. This queues up a GitHub action to take the latest version of the release branch and cherry pick that over. And then we have our secondary verification or review. And this is where we create a pull request in GitHub with just this cherry-picked commit against the release branch. Our GitHub action then tries, and usually fails, to find out who approved this in Fabricator and ping them on GitHub. And then when that is approved, the release manager can merge it into a release branch, and done. Simple process, right? Straightforward. That's why it's like curling like this. Let's talk a little bit about what we approve into the release branch. And as many things, this is not set in stone. This is not a hard and fast rule. Anything outside this slide is not going to be approved. But it's a general rule of thumb. Always, regressions, crash fixes. Anywhere in the process, we take this kind of patches. In the early RCs, RC1, RC2, we can take a little more risky patches. Optimizations. Finish a feature. Oh, you didn't get it done in time. Oh, I didn't even know there was a release coming. You might want to finish it off or even disable it. That's fine in the early RC. Later RCs, we kind of fall back to the always here. Regression, crash fixes. I get very conservative at the end of a release window. So when we're getting to RC3, I'm going to look at regressions and crash fixes. Post the release, so this means 16.01. Now, when we have done the final release, we're in API and ABI stable territory. So from this point forward, there is no ABI breaks and no API breaks on a release. So I think it's very important that everyone understands that if you need to break an API in the release branch, it has to happen early in RC. Because after final, you're done. You have to wait until the next release. And this is kind of where we get back to what I was saying before. There are no super hard rules here. But also, the release manager doesn't know everything. I know nothing about MLIR, for example. What happens if there is a MLRI issue? I probably ping like Mehdi or someone like that and say, what do you think about this in the release? And they'll say, it looks fine, or it looks bad. And then I probably will trust them. Most likely. Very likely. But everything is a discussion, right? We're a community. We're not me and Tom dictating what the release is. Maybe some of you thought when we were talking in the earlier slide that we were talking about pull requests. And we're saying, hey, we're not using that workflow in LLVM yet. We are for the releases. And in order to not make people confused, we actually have two different repos. And so anyone that has been involved in the release process at some point might have gotten a ping from a weird-looking repository that says LLVM project release PRs. And that's the repo where we stage our fixes. So we created a separate repo in order to not confuse people that we had pull requests enabled on the main repo. But we needed a way to kind of create these, to have this integration workflow. So that's why we have two different repos. So when a user actually says cherry pick ABC123. What happens then is that in the release repo, we are creating a branch that takes the issue number, and it creates it from the release branch, cherry picks over ABC123, goes back to the main issue, and this is the issues over here. So it adds a comment to that issue saying branch, LLVM project, release projects, blah, blah, blah. This triggers another bot that creates the PR. And when the PR is merged, we sync the repos. Good news? Everything that is on this slide will go away whenever we move to GitHub PRs as our main review source. This is the lifespan of an issue. When you create an issue and add it to the release that we want to have it in, it's in triage mode. And after that, the release manager or the code owner will either say, this is not valid for this release. It's going to get archived. That doesn't mean the issue is going away. It means it's no longer related to this release. If it ends up in need fix, this means it's up to someone to create the fix, upload it to Fabricator, get it merged into main. After that, it moves to needs PR. That means, OK, you've done the fix. Good job. Now make sure we have cherry-picked this over to the release branch and do all that. When the PR is open, it moves into needs review. And this is where you, if you're a code owner for something, this is where we're going to look to you. You need to tell us at this point if this is a fix that should go into the release branch or not. Unless it's something of like the small number of files that I have touched. Then I might be able to approve it myself. But otherwise, I'll look to you. Needs merge is the last step. This is a manual process. Release manager merges the PR and syncs the repos. And then we're done. At any point, we can archive this issue, say, hey, this is no longer. After a review here, it's usually common that the code owner steps in and says, no, I don't think this should go into the release. Let's wait for the next release. Have anyone ever looked at the release status board in GitHub? Hands up if you have. Oh, I see 3 hands. That's great. So in GitHub, you can click on LLVM, you can click on projects, and then you get this view. So this view will tell you where the issues for a specific release, so we selected 16 here, right? All the issues that needs a fix, all the fixes that, or all the issues that needs a review, and so on. So this is basically where I live during the release window. I pull up this when I've gotten my morning coffee. Before I need to do my real job, I do this. I go through all the issues and see, are there any one that need to be moved or changed or pinged or nagged or whatever. It's a little difficult to find this board. I don't think it's very obvious where it is, but you can probably poke around in GitHub and figure it out. If you don't figure it out, come see me afterwards, and I can show you. Let's look at a specific fix issue. Oh, this is going to be terrible for you in the back there, all right? But this is, you have all seen a GitHub issue, right? If you haven't, can't help you. Let's look at some of the things you have to do. When you file an issue, this is the most important part. If you don't put it in the right milestone, the release managers will not see it. We will not pick it up for the release. So make sure you add it here. There is supposed to be an automation that automatically adds it to the project. We haven't got that working yet, but it will get there. Nick here. already had a fix when he created the issue. That's great. Even if you have a fix for it, you always have to create an issue. Otherwise, it's impossible for us release managers to track anything. So create the issue. He immediately said, cherry pick FC4494D. And he explained why he thinks this should go into the release. So A+ for Nick here, for filing a good issue for something that should go into the release. Okay? This is what the automation is doing then. It picks it up, it issues a command, and it tells you, hey, there is a PR here now. Go look at that. So let's look at that. That PR looks something like this. This resolves this issue. And then it tries. And it's usually pretty bad. And this is because there is no mapping between Fabricator usernames and GitHub usernames. So there is a hack where there is a horrible hack where we look at the commit itself, and then you have to have the Fabricator reviewed at link to Fabricator. If you remove that from the commit that you're cherry picking later, the bot is going to fail. Then it goes to that, looks at the approver list, finds the email address, takes that email address over to GitHub, tries to match that. So if you don't have your email address on GitHub, if you're using different email addresses, or if your public or your profile on GitHub isn't public, it fails. And sometimes it does really crazy stuff, like pinging some completely random person. Probably have happened to someone in here. You got pinged in a release manager issue for reviewing something that is unrelated to whatever you're doing in the LLVM codebase. It's a sad bot, but it tries. All this also goes away when we move to GitHub PRs. Usually, we want people to chime in and say, hey, this PR looks good, right? And sometimes I get the question, how do I approve a PR? Well, you can do it whatever way you want. You can put an emoji. You can say, yes, it's good. You can say, go ahead, or whatever. Because so far, the process from PR into being merged is manual. I go look at it. I see, have someone comment on this, and then I tag it as approved. So it's enough to say, yep. It's enough for you to put a thumbs up. Even though that might end up me saying, what does he mean with thumbs up? And then I have to kind of figure it out myself. So just be clear, it takes you 2 minutes at the most to reply to this bot, so please. So since we all live in the age of mobile phones and short attention spans, and everyone here is now thinking of coffee instead of this boring presentation, I've made this slide. It's a TLDR. And I've added these emojis so everyone can feel like they understand what's happening here, right? This is how we communicate these days. File the issue. Set the correct milestone. Land the fix normally in Fabricator. This is an emoji for land. I could have used a landing plane, but you know, I came to think about that now and not earlier. Cherry pick and reply to the bot. And yay, celebrations all around. I'll buy you a beer later. Beer not included. So unfortunately, things go wrong in this flow. Because not even me and Tom are expert programmers that never write bugs or anything like that. But there are a couple of common troubleshooting steps. So if you learn this, I don't have to tell them to you later. Usually when you do a fix, sometimes you see there are unrelated commits in your PR, and you're thinking, hey, I didn't change that file. Shouldn't be there. Or the cherry picking failed because something has changed between main and the release branch. This is usually common in the later RCs when we have diverged a lot. And we might need to add an additional commit because we found something else that was broken. So let's look at them one by one. Additional commits happens when we are not syncing these two repos correctly. And unfortunately, this is a script on my laptop, so I might have not gotten around to do it yet. And it also happens very often when someone directly commits and pushes something to the release branch. Okay, that's fine. You shouldn't do that, but we'll handle it. We usually encourage people to actually do it when it's like release notes and stuff like that. You have a release note, you want to update it in the release branch, there is no need to go through Fabricator to get that going, right? But please let me or Tom know that you are pushing stuff to the release branch so that we are aware of it, because that's usually when stuff goes out of sync. But you can ignore this. It's totally harmless, it looks funky, the reviewer gets confused, but there is nothing additionally that is going to be merged that, So you can just ping us and say, this happened, and we'll say, okay. Cherry picking failed. So this is when you're cherry picking and the code has diverged. It cannot automatically cherry pick a fix into the release branch. So now you have to manually create the branch instead of letting the GitHub action do it for you. So you create your own branch create your LLVM project fork on GitHub, create your own branch, probably some better name than my fix here. Make sure you're on the release branch, the latest version. Cherry pick over, fix the merge issues, push it to GitHub, and then just do /branch and the username, repository, and branch name. So then we are skipping the automatic cherry picking, but the end result will be the same. Okay, we need to add a second commit to this fix. Well, you can actually specify as many commits you want on the cherry pick. And the important part here to know is that every time you do the cherry pick comment in a GitHub issue, it will reset it to the latest release branch first. So if you want to remove a commit, you also do this. Then you just do with the one commit you want to have. Or re-upload a commit because you have fixed some additional things. You can just override it by issue another cherry pick command. All right, that is basically the current release process. I know that's a lot of slides, a lot of vegetables to eat. But all this is also documented in the documentation. I will have links for that. But I wanted to end this presentation with a little bit of help wanted. Me and Tom are release managers because we said, hey, we want to be release managers. So we're doing this in our spare lunch break, where maybe we get a little time from our employers to do this. But you can help us a lot by triaging issues, becoming a release tester, and don't forget to reply to the bot. And I wanted to throw in a little slide here of encouragement. Because one of the most common questions I've gotten since I become a release manager is, well, who can propose a fix? Or who can help triaging this issue? Please, release manager, do all the work. And the encouragement here is that just 4 years ago, I've never touched LLVM. Then I integrated the toolchain at my then work. Then I fixed a bug. Then I started helping Tom with release testing. Then all of a sudden, one day, Tom said, hey, I'm on vacation. Can you take over the release manager duties? And I think anyone here can help out. And anyone not in this room can help out. And I'm not that smart. I'm not like most of you guys that knows the ins and outs of LLVM, IR optimization pipelines and assembler output and IR lowering and all that shit. Right? I don't know that. I'm just a toolchain guy. I build a toolchain and I sometimes debug weird issues. And then I stand here, holding the keynote of EuroLLVM 23. So anyone can do this. You don't even have to be smarter than me. What does a release tester do? How can I get involved? Well, you have a specific use case for LLVM. You are using it in this way. What we're asking you is when we are releasing an RC, just go do what you normally do and report some issues. Or maybe run the test release script on your specific platform, because it's not one of the platforms that we're doing automatically. It takes time, because just running this script takes maybe 2-3 hours, right? It builds everything and runs all the tests. But in the end, maybe we found a couple of tests failing before the release instead of after the release. So that's great. You can also upload binaries for other people to test to GitHub. So there's a lot. Just get involved, report some issues, all good. How do I help out with triaging issues? Well, look at the release milestone, especially if you have an area of the code that you know well. Go in there, look for every release. Oh, this is actually touching some of my code or some of my area of expertise. Okay, I can help say this is a valid issue, this is a reproducible issue on my machine, and so on. So that's great. That takes a lot of time and stress out of us release manager having to mentally map out the whole LLVM community to figure out who am I going to ping for this issue. Oh, and don't forget to reply to the bot, please. If the bot is pinging you, even if the bot is pinging you in error, which admittedly happen often, you can always say, hey, that's not me, because that takes stress out of me. Because otherwise, I have to figure out, oh, that bot actually pinged the wrong guy. My almost final slide here is that these are some of the things we're working on, and I love to have this conversation with more of you people. So please, find me at the coffee break or whatever. We don't have a current set of automatic binaries. It's the release tester that uploads the binaries. This is an error-prone process, because as soon as you give a bot's job to a man, you know what happens, or person. Don't do that. We want to have automatic binaries. And then like a lot of the complexity you've seen in this is because we have dual systems working here, and we're trying to coordinate and sync and find who's user on that and so on. So when we move to GitHub PRs, likely, if everything goes as planned, the next release, 17, will be the last release using this workflow you've seen. The workflow will probably stay very much the same. You will do cherry pick and you will do something else in the background instead. But the backend will be a lot more simple for AT, hopefully. And we also need a better way to get the approval for fixes, and I'm open to any suggestions for that. I leave you with a few URLs. I will actually post that URL in the Discord after this as well. This is basically a documentation of everything I said here. And you can find me and Tom both on Discord and in the forums and everywhere, right? Don't be afraid to reach out. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tobias. Any questions? We have mics in the middle. If you have questions, please come up to the mic. Don't forget to reply to the bots. I'm not a bot. I have a random question.
Yeah,
Why do you
go ahead.
always start on Tuesdays?
Sorry.
Why do you always start the release on Tuesday? You insisted on that.
Well, yes, Mondays are tricky because especially when we have different time zones. So Tom is in the US, I'm in Europe, so we don't get to talk at all on a Monday unless it's very late for me or super early for him. So Tuesday is a better day because then I can actually see if he have written me some questions or so it's just a practicality question. Tuesdays are better than Mondays.
Great job. In the end, you had this, how do we find the people that approve the PRs? And you're like, okay, I'm open for suggestions. Do you have any suggestions on how to do that? Like, how could we automate that process?
Yeah, I mean, this is something we have been talking about. And one thing is to have, if our code owner situation would be a little more up to date and not be full of a lot of stale names from 10 years ago, that would be a perfect example. But there are also stuff that are hard, right? So this issue might look like a front-end issue, but in the end, it turns out to be something in the code gen side, right? So there is no clear-cut answers to this. So this is why I'm saying, like, okay, code owners could give us a better initial list of people to start pinging. But other than that, I'm not sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, thank you very much for this presentation and for all the work. I think you're doing all of us a massive favor. So thank you again. I think it's super important. I get pinged every now and then with things related to PRs. And I think what's missing, I'm happy to help. I'm always happy to help. I think it's very important. I think what's missing, and you actually hinted, is sometimes I see a lot of notifications and I'm like, is this important? Is this not important? This is something like, and you get like those notifications which mention the bot. I'm like, okay, this is something automated. I think it would be nice, and we probably should discuss that more, to have a process to escalate these things, because when it's PR, when it's release related, I'm like, okay, this is top priority. And some things are top priority. And I think it would be nice to have a mechanism, look, this is more important than everything else.
Right. Yeah, and the part of that problem is that it's not easy for the release managers to know when something is a priority or not also. So I 100% agree, and I know that usually what happens is that the bot goes and pings someone like you, and then a couple of days later I've seen, oh, there is no response to the bot, so I go ping you, and then I get a reply directly, right? Because then it's someone that is not automated as doing the pinging, right? But that's why I'm stressing, just reply to the bot, even if you think it's not related, just saying, oh, this is not related to me, or this is not a high priority, or whatever. And I understand, especially if you're one of the guys that I know the name of, sorry, because then I'm pinging you more, because then I know about it.
I don't mind.
So yes, agreed, also hard problem to solve, because it's not easy for me. Well, I can see when something is a really bad crash fix, I know it's a high priority. But if it's like, oh, this weird stuff is happening inside Flang, like I have no idea, right?
I would just say this presentation is really helping me understand, what the process is and what is like your process.
That was hopefully the point, so good job me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Tobias, for the talk. Let's thank the speaker again.